Hey everybody, Adam Savage in my cave, and we are going to learn some new armor, metalworking, metalsmithing terms today, because we're going to talk about chasing and repoussé with expert Douglas Pryor. How are you, sir?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me, Adam.
I'm so delighted to meet you. So I met Douglas through our mutual acquaintance, friend, colleague, Tony Swatton, maker of all of the swords and things from every movie you've ever seen. I think that's a reasonable way to describe his resume.
No, he's brilliant.
Everything from the Highlander swords all the way down, right? Tony has been part of film history. And Tony and Douglas worked on the Infinity Gauntlet, which I am currently in the process of replicating with your guys' wonderful, wonderful advice. But, dude, I understood the concept of chasing and repoussé, but it wasn't until I Googled your name that I started to understand just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Let's start with the broad definition. What is chasing and repoussé?
Chasing and repoussé is essentially like a game of tug of war with sheet metal. So instead of being additive or subtractive, you're just kind of bullying the metal around where you need it.
And this is an ancient technique.
Yeah, and cultural vocabulary, those trade-specific terms through history do get very specific of whether it's like one side or the front or the back, or maybe they don't care and they do both all under the same terms. So that's where...
So there's a lot of different techniques that have been couched under those terms.
Yeah, so a great example is the Japanese term uchidashi, and that's almost entirely from just the front side.
So philosophically, in making some of the pieces that we'll talk about, there's an oscillation back and forth. Okay, well, actually, can you describe the actual process with the pitch? What's actually going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So pitch is amazing. Like the human history with pitch has gone on since forever. I think they've got some Neanderthal spear point bindings still held down with like rosin, and
pitch is it's baked. Tell me what pitch is exactly.
Pitch
it's not a petroleum product, right?
It can be either. So it can be tar. Bituminous pitch is real.
Okay.
That's a thing.
And it can also be tree sap?
But it can also be tree sap, birch or pine. Pine is very common, and that's mostly what you're seeing in the States.
And pitch is like the earliest glue.
Oh, certainly, yeah.
I mean, one of my favorite things about archaeology these days is that every new article that comes out seems to push human tool use back by another 5,000 years.
Yeah.
I believe that, I like we've been doing clever stuff for a long time, and it's nice to be seeing that long.
Well, anyone who's walked in a forest and touched a tree they didn't mean to and came away with a bunch of sticky stuff, like
right.
Realizing what that adhesive is and then applying it to something, like some of the earliest chisels and punches that we have are made out of bone. And so essentially as soon as you get any kind of sheet gold, people are trying to pattern it with something.
Amazing.
And eventually you need some sort of stable resist, like a filler like pitch, if you want to get more complicated.
So this is my pitch bowl. This is some green pitch. And this is, when we're talking about tree sap or bitumen pitch, this is what it ends up being. It's like a hard sort of plastic in a way.
That's right, right.
You heat this up and you put a sheet of metal on top of it. Maybe it's this, and slowly by hammering it, you can end up with this.
That's right, and this is actually a great example of just working from the front. I love working from the front because you can keep track of an illustration much easier.
Oh.
So, like, it takes a little pre-planning. Like, you pre-stretch your canvas before you start painting. You have to have the volume, but you can essentially push all from the front.
Okay,
and then if the nose needs to be bumped up a little more, or if the brows need a little adjustment, you can just push them from the other side as needed. That preserves material thickness. You can save the thickness for where you need plasticity range.
Okay, so this is actually, I want to get into the physics of this. So to start doing this process, you fill the back of this with pitch, and then you start hammering. And from what I understand, the pitch moves in a slightly, I would describe it as a non-Newtonian way, right? It doesn't shatter, and it doesn't necessarily fully resist that punch. It allows the metal to move, which I'm going to assume, and actually I've been looking forward to talking to you about this, that because pitch moves just a slight amount, I would assume that allows you to maintain a high fidelity of metal thickness, that like it's more uniform. You're not overstretching it in one place.
And since it's, the temperature is going to play with the resist. So if you want less support, you can keep it warmer. If you want more resist, you can keep it cooler. And so where you see recipes in pitch change, because it's not just the rosin, you have like a filler for stabilization, kind of like putting sawdust and wood glue,
Okay.
it creates like a substrate. And so that can be powder of tile, that can be plaster of Paris, that can be just, you know,
these are different
rice,
kinds of
husk,
grog you're
ash.
adding to change the material
So that
properties.
stabilizes it.
Gotcha.
And then you've got something to help it flow, usually some sort of oil, like a vegetable oil. And then sometimes you'll see things added for color, like charcoal powder. So if this had no charcoal powder in it, it would probably be like the color of like a very light peanut butter.
And so every one of these additions of an ingredient is to change the behavioral properties of the pitch as you're working with it.
That's right, because gravers, where you're just doing subtractive work with sharper chisels like
Gravers,
these,
you mean engravers who are taking metal out by
Totally.
using a pointed chisel.
or if you're carving away with like just old school tapping
Right,
and that sort
right.
of thing, which I've started experimenting with this. So this is all just negative relief. That's just a solid piece of 1/8 inch plate.
Oh, this isn't
brass.
chasing. This is something else.
So you'll carve it and then you'll chase on top. So the chasing this is where trade vernacular can get a little granular. Chasing can strictly refer to finish work.
I see.
Or it can refer to a much deeper relief. So that sense of relief tends to have a little ebb and flow based on the trade you're in.
So then in this case, the chasing is you're using the thickness of the metal itself as your resist, as you're planishing and refining these shapes, yes?
That's right. And chasing solid stock, the surface migration is totally doable, but it has a range. You know, just like instead of everything giving, just the surface will give, and you can start to get some burr edges if you want, but that's just a little headdress
Oh my God.
for that guy.
That's the pictures you sent me of that did not do it
Yeah,
justice.
I was, well, you know, it's sculpture. You got to view it in the round. The photos are ever only going to do so much. But this is backfilled just like you were saying, and I've only needed, now this is steel, this is 14 gauge steel, and I've only needed one full heat cycle for an anneal with that steel in order to, because the hot raising will be up front and you'll get it to a shape where you have enough positive space.
So
And then-
I want to just talk about this for a second. The
Yeah,
physics
yeah.
here are, as you're chasing it and you're moving that metal, the metal work hardens.
Absolutely.
As you're moving those atoms around, they're heating up, they're work hardening, and each metal, whether it's copper or brass or steel, has different work hardening properties.
That's true.
One of the things I was really delighted to hear is that when you're shifting a piece of repoussé from working on the front to say working on the back, just the process of shifting it is an annealing process because you're heating it to remove it from the pitch. Is that right?
Sometimes, if the metal's thin enough, you could conduct enough heat to do that. Sometimes like cleaning it and annealing it can be a separate cycle.
Okay.
That way you're not risking burning the pitch or anything like that, because the only things that full-on ruin pitch is like a solvent, contamination, or if you burn it. So
If you overheat it and
if it
it's
starts
smoky.
getting boiling points,
Right.
You start to lose the adhesion qualities, and it'll start to break down. But certainly don't use any resists or any slips. Like I've seen that sometimes, especially like oil.
slip?
Like oil, some folks will oil something to try and set it in to get it back out easier.
Oh.
But it's an adhesive, and that's like you're you're changing the recipe.
Right.
So you're losing the adhesive and you're changing the recipe over time. But those are good things to know, because sometimes someone will hand you pitch and they're like, hey, I don't need this anymore. Do you want it? And you're like, well, maybe I can pass it down. I'll find somebody that wants this. Absolutely. But then you don't know what you have. And there's some like experimentation of working backwards and going like, why is this so gammy? I'm just like, I don't know.
Right.
But it's fixable.
In the rudimentary chasing that I've been doing this past week, it wasn't hard for me to understand that from this one could get this. But what really blows me away looking at your stuff is that you can, the level of detail that you can achieve with this is just shocking to me. I'm curious, how hard is it to overdo the metal? Have you burst through a piece while chasing?
How hard is it to crack something?
Yeah.
Oh, it's dead simple.
Really?
I've cracked almost everything important to me.
Really?
Oh yeah, dude. Yeah.
Oh, that's
well, I
gotta
mean,
be-
like you're
so,
you're
like,
on
you've got
the
some
edge
piece like this you've been
of
working on-
exploration. You're going to find some sort of breaking point. And so
to me,
with
the breaking point is really important in the learning process, right?
Yeah.
But that's got to be tragic if you're working on something like this for dozens of hours.
yeah, I mean, you get over it. I don't know. It's like there's nothing else to be done. You can live with it and let it. You can celebrate it. You can patch it. You can do whatever you want. But I've finally started to get to the point to where I'm I don't know. As long as you're not cracking the same way every time.
Right, you're
Right,
learning
you've
slowly.
progressed. But like I didn't crack anything on the bat mask, which was nice. And I haven't cracked anything on this either. And so this is a brass alloy. It has I think they call it commercial bronze, but it's got zinc, not tin, so it's not exactly
It's not exactly
bronze at all. I
bronze.
think it's just like a selling point. But something like that bat mask is raised first. So once you start getting something a little bit bigger, you start using shaping stakes in order to get all that height. So
Okay,
I can
but
get
I want
that.
to talk about the difference between raising, right,
Let's do it.
and chasing, because they're very similar process, but very different at the same time.
Yeah.
So raising is not having it attached to pitch. You're just shaping the metal and stretching the metal into a rough form.
That's right. And it's just a game of leverage. So essentially you can set something against a shape, and then you are using that shape to change the angle of the surface of the metal.
And these are some of the shapes that you set against?
Yeah, something like this would be an example. This is just something I found myself. So these are annoying to find, right?
Yeah, I've noticed they're very hard
You
to
are
find.
buying something that someone's like taken a casting of an original, and they're so trade specific. A lot of the Pexto stakes have like sharp corners because that reflects that trade. And all my stuff is really round because a lot of my work is sculptural. I need the flexibility, I need the versatility, I need the angle change. So when I'm working with something like this, placing it against that.
So you start with a flat round, and then you make it this shape on a stake like that.
That's right. Okay. You've got 3 points of contact between the point and the sights. And then I like my T-stakes with a slight flat in the middle. So that's a gap, and you can change your angle if you want more leverage. You can back it off if you want to fan it back the other way. Because the real point, like the point of equilibrium is that middle ground. Like if you build too much of a cylinder too quickly, the strength, the geometry of that cylinder inhibits material exchange. So the internal structure, you can't rob from the edge anymore. So if we had a big bed sheet and I just grabbed the middle and I pulled it up, all the edges are retreating in, yeah?
Oh, wow.
The sheet doesn't get thinner.
So you have to
You've
think
just
through the
changed.
engineering of the piece as you're going about where the extra metal's coming from.
Yeah. So the reason the bat mask was so easy compared to this vulture is you have a very simple base structure. I can use very big, broad, round structures, 3 raising passes, 3 annealing cycles, and I can get the depth enough for that bat mask, where this has like 15. I've got this big teardrop shape. I've got a smaller ball stake that fits here, a larger ball stake that fits there, 2 straightaways in between, and there's a lot more that can go wrong with just changing something that simple.
So when you describe this as working from the front, in regular repoussé, there's often a oscillation between working the front and the back? That's what you're talking about when you say repoussé cycles?
Yeah. Repousse, the French verb to push, it just, they've got a word for pulling too. It's like, I think it just got popularized. And depending on where you go, like in the UK, where I've done some work with people, like repoussé tends to refer to shaping stake work a lot more often than it does like with chasing punches.
Interesting.
Go to Nepal and you'll see something completely different as well. And they've got, shaping stakes that instead of hammering directly on the stake, they'll use the stake to resist the metal and they'll hammer around it to dent up areas. And then they'll come in and clean it up and all that kind of stuff. If you need more detail, the punches come out. Otherwise, sometimes that's enough.
That's been something I've been interested and surprised by with armoring is that the hammer blows are not where a beginner thinks they're going to be.
Yeah, sometimes you sneak up on it. You need enough. You need enough mass. You need enough, especially with armor. Like, man, they hogged out some material for that stuff. I mean, it looks more radical like this on the inside of pieces than it does with anything super, super highly refined or fabricated or anything that we have in modern shelves.
I think it's worth talking about this now that you've referred to this. This is a piece of 1/8-inch steel plate.
Yeah.
And again, you sent a picture of this and said it was 4x8, and I was like, that looks giant, and it still did not prepare me at all for the depth. And this is all from a single plate of steel.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. How long? I'm looking at buckets of pitch here.
Yeah.
In order to do something like this, how do you possibly accommodate? You don't have a swimming pool full of pitch for something like this.
No, I mean, that'd be rad, but that's a lot. And if I had a team of folks and I wasn't a one-man band, then that would be possible. All of this detail so far has been airforming because the strength of steel with this much mass acts as a fair resist. But then that game of tug of war, you might find some areas collapse and you got to push it back out. The timeline of areas I have access to are kind of unique as well. So
What do you mean the timeline of pieces you have access to?
some of the shapes are timeline specific. So look at the teeth here.
Right.
These are properly undercut.
Wow.
So I shaped out enough of a big bubble, just a mass angled outward, so I could work around each tooth.
Oh, so that so you started by, oh wow, you started by stretching the metal knowing you're going to be folding it and stretching it.
That's right. So you got to stretch that canvas. You got to get your base shape.
Oh my gosh.
Then you can sculpt each individual tooth. And then I carved out a set of tongs that fit on the teeth, and I would heat up one tooth at a time and actually lean it out a little, shape around it, lean it right back in.
Oh man.
And then once I was done, I heated up, because this is so much thicker. This is almost original parent material. This is about 3 mil, where this I'll bet you was a 0.5 mil at
Right,
best.
from all the stretching. Okay,
So-
so you made, wow.
Heat it up, more heat on the top, a little less heat on the bottom because of the different thickness variation.
Yeah.
And then you can rawhide the colder tooth, because that'll be cold and this will be hot.
Right.
And then you can rawhide it down into place.
So when you say air forming, you're using an air hammer?
Air forming meaning nothing supports it but air.
Oh, okay.
So it's just like,
so it's you and hammers.
that's it. That's it. So where on larger pieces like this, I use chasing, you can build like wooden quarantine, just dams to put pitch just where you need it. And I've done a couple larger pieces. One
So
that comes to mind is an elephant that I did, and I
Right.
would just block out a section at a time and chase the highlights.
So if you wanted to detail the eye to a degree that was like this level of fineness, you might build a dam behind this and fill that with pitch.
That's right. I would just create a cutout right behind the neck, kick it there, melt in, backfill the whole head,
Right.
slap a big stable form behind it like a big piece of wood, and then set it down, make sure it's supported well,
It's an
keep
awful
it
lot
warm.
of prep for every step. I mean,
It doesn't all happen at once. You have
Right.
breathing room to consider all those steps. But, something like this, I probably have, 2 months, 3 months into this, and I probably need another month to finish it,
wow.
at least.
Yeah.
So-
And it's also, do you sit at the beginning of a project like this? I'm sure you do sketches, but do you also then make lists about the order in which you want to attack it?
Sometimes I'll do just a mock-up, the exact same thing, but
like a
about
small
hand
one.
size out of copper and out of 1 mil, and to see how the metal shifts, decide a lot of. I mean, how do you know what a crocodile elbow looks like until you're right there doing it? I'm like, I don't know, but that's part of the joy of that discovery, is then I get to figure it out.
Do you have a favorite metal to chase in, whether it's copper, brass, or an alloy or steel?
I started with armoring. I'm a big fan of steel. I think it's just it's got a beautiful luster. It also rots kind of beautifully.
It rots beautifully?
Yeah, well, I mean,
mean the
rust
yeah.
never sleeps, right? So,
yeah.
it's why my wedding ring's out of just normal steel, is because, like relationships, if you don't keep touching it, they disappear,
That's great.
right? So there's kind of a romance there, but like I love copper, brass, bronze, silver. They're all beautiful. They all have the right fit for the right time.
I was blown away by, first of all, that copper anneals by heating and quenching, which just surprised me.
Yeah.
But then I was also shocked at how pliable it is when fully annealed. I wasn't prepared that it's almost like leather. Like
Butter, man.
yeah, I
Yeah,
bend
yeah.
most of it with my
Yeah.
fingers.
Yeah. I only started working with copper because one of my shop teachers in college, Scott Berry, he just handed me a bunch. He was like, "You should probably, because I at the time was helping him with stuff because of arthritis and things. He's like, this will make your joints last longer. Like, try this. You'd like it
Oh,
probably."
wow.
And he showed me what I had to buy pitch somewhere else, but he told me what pitch was, and I just had to experiment with it because until that point I was working in pretty thick armor grade steels.
Yeah. Am I right? This is a donut with
Yeah,
a jumping spider on it?
That's right. Okay. Look, they can't all be serious pieces. You need a second to
This
take
is
a
Homer
breath.
Simpson, the arachnophobe's worst nightmare.
That's right.
Oh my God.
Just a big bite. Because like I went through a playing with dough phase for textures and just a bunch of different doughs and things. Because trying to capture something very pillowy in metal can be tricky. It's easy to get like the reptile-y, scaly, porous, but to capture something that's supposed to be like velvet, it can be a lot more challenging.
Well, and these jimmies here, the sprinkles on them, are those? Is this an example of those are done? There are multiple operations back and front on this one.
Let me pull it out of there. You can see it. For years I used 1 mil because
that's
like
40 thousandths.
It's about approximately, it's close to 18 gauge. It has a really nice middle ground of beautiful push and pull. If you put a line on one side, you can see it from the other side.
Right.
So it's very informative, like what are you doing from either side of the metal.
But there's also enough metal that
you could still have a lot to play with. It still fabs okay, but I was convinced I was going to keep working with 1 mil until I had stopped or slowed down cracking pieces.
Yeah.
And when you have 16 gauge like this, you can go so much further.
Wow.
You can do so much different stuff. Now, I had a lot more metal to play with. Getting the bite out of the donut was no problem. The frosting actually has like a bit of a hook, a bit of an undercut. But it was so thick, the lines for the sprinkles, they didn't transfer. You can't see them from the other side. There's so much mass in the material thickness.
Right.
I had to, with calipers, like map out each one, guess, overshoot, and then come back and chase it all back down from the other side.
So as you're going back and forth, you're having to track the location. So are these little final indents like one of your repoussé tools?
Yeah,
exactly?
you want to
Make a guess?
find the thumbprint there? I think it's probably
Something
close.
like that, and is that like the final step of bringing it up? And actually to get more detail, you choose different hardnesses of pitch based on the kind of detail you're looking for?
I've actually used the same medium green pitch for almost everything.
Wow.
Thick steel, thin copper, everything. Because again, the temperature can change. In the valley in California where I live, it's pretty warm. So in the summer, if you don't have climate control, you can find, if you set an overfilled pitch bowl on a top shelf, you might find it across onto the bottom shelf by the end of the day if you're not careful. So it does take some planning, but no, mostly I've used the same pitch for everything.
Okay.
I know some folks, you end up leaning into something, whatever you're most familiar with, what treats if you're just working with fine silver all the time, you might have a specific preference.
Okay.
If you live somewhere colder, you might have a pitch with a higher, oil content to help it flow a little easier at a lower temperature.
The environmental aspect of shop practice is under talked about. It's like I've had jobs that seemed like they were going to go great, but it was 100 degrees outside, and nothing would set because of that, or everything set too quickly.
Yeah.
Talk to me about hammers. I'm seeing some really, really beautiful hammers here, including. I love the filing of like Renaissance era tools. The amount of fine detailing. Is this your work?
There's a lot of love that goes into this. This is a good friend of mine that lives near me, John Williams. He makes a lot of these over here. I've got a lot of hammers from close friends. It's how I ended up getting some tools in the first place. This is one of John's as well. And him and a couple friends, we actually at Tony's shop. This was at a Metalpalooza that we did in 2017. They approached me and they're like, "Hey, we just forged a hammerhead. Like, you've got another day. Like, do you want to figure out some?" And I don't really do this at the time. I hadn't done that kind of carving and relief work before, because you just have to cut away some, and then the surface work is done with chasing punches. So
cutting away some. Are you using like a Dremel to do that?
Just these cutting chisels. The Japanese, the katakiri chisels, if I'm saying that right. So they hold a pretty good edge, and I learned how to do some of the basics about this from an artist that unfortunately is no longer with us, but he was like a world-class artist on Japanese metalworking, and one of the few Westerners with credentials from Japan to work on their authentic pieces. Ford Hallam, if you ever get a chance to see his work, all his educational stuff online is still like some of the best. And I looked up to that guy forever. I found his stuff in college, and I had the great fortune to work with him in 2019.
Crazy. I remember the first time I realized that the signature on Japanese swords is done with a chisel.
Yeah, probably a V-cut chisel, a lot like this one, is something that you would see very often, something like that.
God, look at how tiny that is.
They can get quite small. And these are the ones that I'm using for a back plate like this. And I mean, I'm still super new. I've only got like a month into this. I'm still super new at carving in that style of relief. The chasing work and things is something I've been doing for about a decade now. So I feel pretty confident there. But this, it'll probably take me just as long to find that second nature.
It sounds like despite having done this for an extremely long time, there's no end in sight to the number of new pieces and parts to learn, and other cultures doing the same thing but differently.
There's a lot to fall in love with, man.
Amazing.
And you'll never be done. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of chasing. Chasing exists between illustration and full relief, right? So between the worlds of sculpture and illustration, we can make that relief work be anything.
Have you come across a piece in a museum? You must have come across a piece in a museum that's really ancient and felt like, oh, I totally understand that craftsperson. Like,
it's like shaking hands with a ghost.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's really cool.
Art Spiegelman once talked about that communication as a seance.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's like an exercise in empathy, isn't it? It's like seeing those same, relating to those struggles.
No, right. Knowing that they were cursing.
Like I was chatting with Norm earlier, going like, dude, there's like some camaraderie in seeing you working on this, because I'm watching you struggle with some stuff that I struggled with, and I'm like, I mean, you're only one dude. We had a team of experts, like really, really good people, and I only had one job. The pattern maker would give me things, and I would make them full 3D. That's my strength. But I'm like, I went to school for fab work. Ironically, terrible at fab work, so I passed the torch. It's
Amazing.
like, it takes a team.
I really appreciate you giving me this ground level overview. One of the lovely things about being a generalist is I feel like it regularly lets me sort of just peek above the clouds at complexity, right? And complexity I might never get to, but at least I get to understand it and execute it in the work that I do. I can't believe how deep this rabbit hole goes, and this is one of the loveliest things I have ever seen, man.
I really appreciate that. It's a little surreal, like hearing you say it. Like having you help me lift this out of my van is something that I'll cherish.
What an amazing thing, dude. Thank you so much.
Dude, Adam, really, it's my treat.
Thank you guys so much for watching. And while usually I use this space to tell you about new merch, I'd like to tell you about some classic merch. Specifically, my favorite thing we have ever produced, which is the Adam Savage Shop apron. I love it when people bring these to me to sign at my cons. But if you can't get to one of our cons, that's fine. You don't have to wait, because we are selling both signed and unsigned versions of these aprons at adamsavage.com. Get yours today and start wearing it in.